I don't think my dad had a good death, and having a good death is super important. And that sounds really counterintuitive, doesn't it? A good death, but it's just as important as a good life.
So I'm joined today by the wonderful Dr. Amir Khan. Thank you so much for coming in and doing this. It's so nice to see you.
And you.
Wasn't that long ago I did see you.
No, it was not.
Much different environment then, wasn't it? Surrounded by 4 women.
I'm not complaining.
So obviously, we're here to talk about, openly talk about death and funerals and how important it is to do that. Now, you actually, I was very sad to read that you lost your father when you were very young. Was it 26?
I was, 26. So I was a newly qualified doctor really at the time. And you think, because you learn about it in medical school, you see it in hospitals, and you think you're ready for it. But when it's your own family, it's a very, very different experience. And I remember getting the call, and I was a GP trainee, and I was halfway through a consultation, and the phone rang in my room. And normally when I'm with a patient, I'll just answer it, go, I'm with a patient, and just hang up. And I did that, and then it rang again. I went, I'm with a patient, and just hung up again. And then they messaged me on my computer just going, answer your phone and stay on it. And then I took the call, and then one of our receptionists had told me that my sister had rung and said Dad had died. He'd had a long-term heart problem, heart failure, and he'd had a number of heart attacks. And
was that over? It was about 10 years.
Well, maybe longer, because he was a bus driver, my dad, but he was signed off sick when I was probably about 12. So quite a long time he was at home really unwell because he had terrible heart failure after his heart attacks, which means that his heart wasn't pumping blood around his body properly, and it was collecting on his lungs and his legs. So every time he walked anyway, he got very short of breath, and he couldn't even, he just managed to get to the bathroom. He couldn't get up the stairs, so we had to bring everything downstairs. So we had a long period where he was unwell. But then we kind of just got used to it. And so it was still a bit of a shock when it happened. And I still remember that consultation, as you would, I guess. And I was halfway through, and then you hear this news, and you have to be very professional. And I had to finish the consultation. And I just remember the patient just kept adding more and more things to the list of things he'd come in with. And it was really tricky, because one part of me wanted to say, get out of my room.
I don't actually care right now. Yeah.
But then the other part was, well, I don't want to miss anything in case he says something really important, because often they leave that till the very end of a consultation. And so so finished the consultation. I had 2 more patients left to see, which my colleague saw for me, and then went to the hospital. But it was a really surreal experience, because everything slows down, doesn't it? I remember the traffic being really slow to get to the hospital, and then I was thinking, am I in a rush because he's dead? And what is the rush? But then I thought, well, no, my mum's there, my sisters are there, and I need to be there. And every kind of person who cut into the lane and slowed me down, I was just getting more and more wound up. But it was just a really difficult situation.
So it wasn't a case of, do you think it made it easier in some ways because you knew it was inevitable, or was the shock still?
It was still, there were lots of false alarms. So there was lots of times when my dad had chest pain or got very short of breath, and we had to call an ambulance. And a lot of the time, he just either wasn't taken to hospital and they managed him at home, or he was taken to hospital and he was home later that day. And so it wasn't routine, because it wasn't that often, but it was often enough for us not to worry too much. And so when he called the ambulance, because he called the ambulance himself that day and said he wasn't feeling very well. And it sounds awful, but my mum was there, and one of my sisters was in the house, and they're so used to it. They were like, all right, Dad, no worries. We'll pack an overnight bag for you and whatnot. And so, but he actually, and the ambulance people knew him as well. So I think there was not that sense of urgency.
Because it was happened many times.
It happened many times. But then from what I know, what happened, he was taken into the back of the ambulance whilst it was parked outside our house, and he had an arrest there, and they tried to resuscitate him. And I think what then kind of worried my mum and sister was why the ambulance was parked outside our house for so long. And then I think they were out there for about 45 minutes. And then they drove off, and my mum and sister followed them to the hospital, which they normally do anyway. They didn't know what was going on, and so and then I got the call to come into the hospital, and it's so different being a patient to being a doctor, or a family member, because even though that the hospital room, the A&E was where my sister is a consultant right now, so she was the sister who went with him to the hospital. So it must have been even harder for her because it was her colleagues working on my dad. And what they did, which is what we do really, he had a resuscitation order in place. Well, he wasn't not for resuscitation because we hadn't had that discussion, and we should have had. And so my mum and sister, and they do encourage or try and let the family watch some of the resuscitation process to show that they've tried everything. And I think that's fair. And they saw that. So when I got there, it was a bit of a sad kind of scene because he was lying on the hospital bed. One of his arms was kind of coming out of the blanket. He still had his IV lines in. He still had his tube in his mouth. And the nurse, it was just me and the nurse at that point, and she was just taking things out. And it was all a bit surreal. You're not quite you know she has to do it, but also at the same time you kind of go, well, can I just have a minute? But you don't want to be rude because you've seen family members be rude to staff, and you don't want to be that person. So it was all a bit
surreal.
Very surreal. Yeah.
Did you because your dad had been ill for so long, had you as a family discussed with him what he wanted when he passed? Or?
No, we hadn't, which sounds really surprising now because all I do is encourage, as part of my role as a GP, talk when patients have an illness without a cure. We try and talk about it and get that written down formally. But we hadn't done that, and we hadn't been asked to do it either. And again...
So did that make it incredibly difficult, as in... What now? When someone passed, what would he have wanted? What, Well,
we didn't know what he wanted specifically, but culturally there is a set of things we have to go through.
Right.
And that was helpful because we know what the funeral arrangements have to be, and there's very little kind of flexibility in that. And so I think he expected our cultural funerals, and so that helped.
But it's the little things, isn't it, at funerals? Like culturally and religiously, if you are religious, you know what you're meant to do.
Yes.
But it's the little things, isn't it?
Things. Well,
what music, what food, what...
Well, we don't have music at our funerals. It's a very somber affair, which I'd like to change a little bit, to be honest. But what happens is everybody descends on your house. So even before we got home, word had spread. And that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to pass that information around in the community. And before we even got home, there were cars parked up and down our street and people waiting for us to come home. And there must have been that night about 200 people in our house. Wow. And it was really useful for my mum because they were very supportive towards her. And that continued for about 2 weeks. People would turn up at 8 a.m. They'd be there till about 2 a.m. Not the same people. It'd be like a cycle of people. And actually, at the time, I was thinking, God, I just want a minute. But now, in hindsight, it was actually really helpful to have them all there.
Yeah. Did it? You were saying were you just starting out as a doctor then? Did it change your thought process with your patients on death and speaking about it?
Yeah. So as a result of that, and I'm the palliative care lead for the practice I work in, and I think part of what I went through with my dad encouraged me to take that role on. Because
did you have that with your dad? Did you have palliative?
No.
Oh no, because it was sudden, wasn't it?
Yeah,
really?
Well, he had a chronic illness, but it wasn't one where
you knew a time, like
we had it was over a long period of time. But now with people with heart failure, we do involve the palliative care team, but back then we didn't do. And I think that's important because people hear palliative care or care of the dying and they think cancer, but it's any terminal illness or any illness without a cure, and so we can involve them as early as we need to, and then they can just judge the frequency in terms of how often they want to come in and see that person. And I
So
think that
you've
would have been
become that-
helpful.
You've become
I've become part of it,
yeah.
which is important to me, because I don't think my dad had a good death, and having a good death is super important. And that sounds really counterintuitive, doesn't it? A good death, but it's just as important as a good life.
I know what you mean, because my sister had great palliative care, and it made a difference. And in some respects, even if it didn't make a difference to her, because for a lot of it, near the end, she was out of it. But for the family, it was a massive help.
Yeah.
Did it make you think about your own
My own death.
Did it make you think, I want people to know this is what I want?
Yes, I think it has, and I have voiced that. So I know culturally I'll have the same kind of the main part of the funeral will be the same as my dad and his dad and all of that. But I think what I want from mine is it there's a lot of crying. There's a lot. We kind of show our emotions very vocally, and there's a lot of, it's very dramatic. And when my mum was crying, it was wailing, and then another auntie, they're not real aunties, but my mum's friends, they'd come in and they'd start wailing, and it would kind of set off a chain event of wailing.
Yeah.
And you know when a new person arrives, not because the doorbell went, because the wailing started again, and it would just carry on. And then there's the women in one room and the men in the other room, and the men are very quiet, and they just go, so tell me again what happened. And you have to repeat the story over and over again. And it's just very kind of, it's different. It's very different. But yeah, I don't get me wrong, Colleen, I do want some people to cry at my funeral.
I think everyone does. I mean, the thoughts of everyone being there, not a tear shed. You'd think,
and I
come back and haunt them.
Yeah, exactly. And I want the wailing. I quite like the wailing. I want some of that, but I don't want it to go on for too long.
Yeah.
And so I think, with my own, I do want to draw a line under it, because it I don't want it to have long-term repercussions for people. And I think planning your death helps reduce the risk of that happening. Because for me, when my dad died, I was the only man in the house at that point. So I had to sort out the funeral, the death certificate, everything. And I had no clue whatsoever. And I also had no money. And so that was a stress. And so all of that meant, my grieving had to wait until all of that was sorted. And I think that had an impact on things. And I'm not quite convinced I grieved fully.
I don't think you do at the time. I think that comes later when everyone's gone and the wailing has stopped.
The wailing has stopped.
Then yours starts.
Yeah. So that kind of put a pause on that, and also because when there's that many people in the house, Colleen, you have to make a lot of cups of tea. There's a lot of cups of tea involved.
So it's lucky I wasn't there. I'm a tea addict. I'd have been there all day.
I remember one man at the funerals, because we get catering, and he went, "Is there any dessert?" And I went, "No, there's no dessert. It's a funeral."
Oh, no. People are so funny.
Yeah.
So how do you find with some of your patients that come in, especially ones who've either got relatives or they themselves have a terminal illness, or they know a relative has, do you try and encourage them to talk about it and talk about the arrangement side of it?
Yeah. So when we go out to speak to these patients and their families, we have something called a respect form that we have to fill in. So this replaced the old care of the dying pathway. And on that form, this is in England and Scotland, I don't think Wales and Northern Ireland have it, but on this form, it's all about what their wishes are. So all these things that we're talking about, getting it written down, so where they would like to die, who they want around them, how much medical intervention they want, prolonged suffering, or whether it's going to be beneficial to them, and having those really open, frank discussions. We have them with the patients while they can still make those decisions, and we try and encourage their families to be in the room so they can hear it as well. Now, it's the approach is different depending on the patient, depending on their age, depending on their diagnosis and their cultural background as well. And some people are just not ready for that, and you just kind of leave them we talk about it like being a flight of stairs. You kind of walk them down it one step at a time with each time you go and see them, and the next time we'll take them down another step and another step, because you don't want to push them down the stairs. So it's kind of like that. And the important thing is we try and keep everything in line with their wishes, and we say, look, this is what the hospice is, this is what hospice at home is, this is our role as the palliative care team, and this is what your options are. And some people are not ready for that, and that's fine. And then we'll revisit it at a later date in a different way. But
why do you think people do find it? So many people find it so hard to talk about it.
Yeah.
And it's the one thing that is going to happen.
Some people think it's tempting fate. Some people think religiously that it's in God's hands and not theirs, so they shouldn't be making those decisions, particularly around resuscitation. Some of the conversations we have, and it goes across all religions, is, whatever God wants will happen, not what I want. But
even talking about the funeral arrangements, like some people don't want to talk about the actual death itself, but then they find it so hard to, I feel like everyone, before they get to that point, before they're even ill, or none of us know when it's going to happen, that we should be talking about it.
We should be talking about it. And I encourage my patients to do that. But I have to admit, I'm guilty as anyone. I have not made a will. I have not talked about what, apart from with you, Colleen. You're the only person who knows.
Oh, I'll get you to talk about anything on here. We'll be here all night, me and
you. So I haven't talked about it. Because in my head, I'm thinking...
could we get it now?
Yeah,
so
get it on paper as well.
Yeah,
please do. This is like my respect form. But I think it's... Because you think, I'm young, it won't happen to me. And it's for people with a medical condition or older people. But it is for anyone at any time. And I think it's the denial, isn't it? We're not programmed to talk about our death. Our biology and our psychology kind of resists those conversations because it's not something you want to talk about. Our biology is all about reproduction and passing on our genes and living on rather than not living on. And so it goes against everything you kind of believe in
but then it's so important, if not for yourself, for your family, because the one time when families fall out, sometimes forever, is having those discussions about, well, I think they would have wanted this, well, I don't think they did. And if the person themselves have made those arrangements,
totally, that's the most important thing. If you're not doing it for yourself, think about the pressure, because sometimes those decisions haven't been made by our patients, and then when we talk to their family members, you can just see the weight of all of that and how much pressure and that often makes them not want to make a decision because they don't feel that they can make that decision for their loved ones.
Yeah, but I've learned so much about, from the CoOp funeral services as well, and not just because they're a part of this. I mean, they are part of this, and that's how I've learned more. But, some of the wacky things they get asked for. People always think funerals, you have to have this solemn, no one's going to accept if you want to be, if you want your coffin in the shape of a whatever, that it's all doable now. It's just this kind of scared thing that people have where they just don't want to think about it. And it's something that, having done this, I realise, and also having lost my sister, of how important it is.
I always say to my patients, make a day of it. So go out, do your will or plan your funeral, and then go for lunch, go somewhere nice afterwards. If it's me, I'd like to go to the garden centre, somewhere, which you enjoy. So you make a whole day out of it, and you get, like with anything, get the worst bit out of the way first and then go and do something fun. And that helps, if you've got an elderly relative or a relative with a terminal illness who can go out, make a day out of it, because it's quality time with them as well. But also in the long run, you're making these decisions which will help both of you.
Yeah. Well, I'm intrigued now. I want to know what your plans are for when you pop off.
Well,
I know you've got to have the wailing.
I've
We've
got
got
to
a
have
bit
the
of
wailing,
crying.
Mexican wailing. Yes.
But what else do you want? What food do you want?
Well, food, it's got to be curry, because there is no better food than curry. Ideally, I like my mum to make the curry because her curries are the best.
Well, she needs to leave the recipe in case she's not
needs
here
to leave
either.
I'm learning, but I have to leave it then as well, won't I? Because it won't work.
That recipe needs to be kept in a safe.
Yes. And so I want curries, because I think curries are really kind of communal, aren't they? You put big pots of it in the middle and people just help themselves. And it encourages
is
talking.
Food part of... I mean, I know there's always food at funerals, but is it a big part of your
huge
culture?
Part, yeah, huge part. So we normally all sit on the floor and we have big, like, big kind of vats of curry, because there's usually 500 plus people at our funerals, and so you need a lot of food, and they all expect food. So
Are these people you know, or just just turn up?
They a bit of both.
I don't think I know 500 people for my funeral. I'm feeling really inadequate now.
At my dad's funeral, there was close to 1,000 people.
Stop.
Seriously, it's they and people come and they hear and they just come and they want to get supportive. Wow. They want to get fed. They want to, all of the above, really. But a lot of it is support, and every single one of them will come to you and pass on their condolences.
That's fantastic.
It is. It really is.
But you don't have music. Would you have music?
I would have music.
Would you? What music would you have?
So I'm a big fan of 90s R&B.
Right.
So we've got to get some of that on. And it's all quite sexy, isn't it? 90s
yes, it is.
Which is how I describe myself, obviously. So perfectly fitting for me. And you know what? If people want to grind, that's fine as well. Because that's how I spend most of my life.
Goodness, I know this is a terrible, awful thing to say, but I hope I'm still around when you've gone.
Yeah, honestly, it will get.
Because I want to go.
Yeah,
to that.
I'll get a playlist together. We'll start like kind of slow and then work our way up.
But you see how important it is, really, to either have that written down or to tell your next of kin.
Yes, totally, because they wouldn't know. It'd be a somber wailing funeral. It'd just stop at the wailing. But I want the wailing, and I want the beats to the wailing.
You want people grinding by the end and eating curry.
Eating curry, grinding. I do want the crying. I've got to have some crying.
Listen, I know now. So if I'm there, I'm going to go, look, he wants us all wailing at some point.
1 hour
crying.
of wailing.
1
minimum.
hour of crying and wailing.
Yeah.
Bit of curry to get us in the mood. And then he wants us all grinding.
Perfect. Turn down the lights. Whatever happens at my funeral stays at my funeral.
But you know what? We're having this conversation now, and we should be very morose and it's very sad and it's all a bit scary. But actually, this is what it should be.
That's what I want it to be like. I do. And then I want people to go home and go, oh, that was a great tune. And I haven't heard that song for ages. But
have this discussion. You can have this discussion, and it's okay to laugh like we are.
Yeah,
because it is something that's inevitable. So let's make it as easy as possible for the people we leave behind.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
And actually, this is encouraging me to have this discussion with my loved ones, because I genuinely haven't, and I have it with lots of other people every single day, and I haven't done it. So I
But you know what? Even if it's too hard to have as an actual face-to-face discussion, my sister wrote a lot of hers down and left it for us.
Yeah.
So we knew, I've said it before, we knew who was going in what car even.
Yes.
To the service, and she'd written it all down.
Yeah.
She hadn't actually. Because it is a hard discussion to have, because you don't want to hear your loved one talking like that. But it was the best thing she ever did. And that's when I woke up and thought, everyone should be doing this.
I think I'm going to do that, because I think if I tell my mum I want grinding at the funeral, she'll just forbid it. Whereas if I'm gone, she can't.
Yeah. Because everyone will go, that's what he wanted.
Yeah. So stop wailing, ladies. Let's start moving.
Do you know what?
And mix that men and women up. We don't want them in separate rooms.
Yes, forget that. Yeah. On that note, I mean, this has been the best one ever, I think. I hate to say that I've loved this, but I've actually loved it.
Like, but not dead.
Well, some people are having them, aren't they?
Living funerals. I might have a living funeral as a dry run. See what songs work best and try the food, and then
just have a party.
Just
have a party. Yeah. But if I'm not on that guest list and you've got 1,000 there, then I'm really insulted about that.
That's fair, Colleen. I'll get you on it.
I'm just going to turn up. Because I'll turn up and go, I know what he wanted. He told me.
Yeah, you'll be like guest of honour because you know. You're the only one in the know, so you will be.
Oh, this is fantastic. I just want to thank you so much for coming in and being so open and honest. And
thank you.
For someone that does, you kind of, I guess, face this more than any of us because of the profession you're in, and you're such a joy to be around.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm definitely going to have this. Well, I'm going to write it down.
Write it down.
Yes,
I'll keep it for you.
Thanks, Colleen.
That's all right. Can I pick the people I'm grinding with, or?
But there's a lot of choice when there's 1,000 people.
Well, there is.
Yeah.
God, it's a really bad thing to say I can't wait, but I actually can't wait.
No, I want to be there too.
You'll be there.
You'll be there in spirit.
You'll be there in spirit. Thank you so much. So here I am once again, joined by the gorgeous Yolanda, our cruise expert, and for the first time, Jeannie from CoOp Funeral Care. So, I'll start with you, Yolanda. Obviously, we had Dr. Amir on before,
Yes.
and sadly, he lost his father, but knew well in advance that was a possibility. Do you, does having time, do you think, to prepare mentally make it easier for people, or sometimes maybe harder?
Well, there's a thing called anticipatory grief, and that's the grief you feel before you lose someone. So this happens, it's not just death this happens, it's many types of losses. So the good thing about that is it does give you time to prepare. However, having time to prepare doesn't necessarily make you feel ready when the time comes. And as Dr. Amir said, it's expected, but when somebody dies, it can still be a shock. So like his dad was a sudden death, even though he'd been ill for many years.
Yeah, you almost get used to the fact, well, he's been around 10 years. It's almost like you get used to it. He's not going anywhere.
And in sudden death, you don't have time to prepare, but it's still a shock.
Yeah.
So there's no good way to die. There's no best way to die.
No, and the thing is, whenever, somebody passes away, whether you know or whether it's last minute, it's still horrendous feeling. You still grieve.
Awful.
You don't go, well, I knew he was going to die, so that's fine.
Yeah.
You still grieve.
You still grieve. And it's a natural reaction to losing someone is to grieve.
Cruise isn't private, is it?
No, it's a charity. And
So it's charity
It's
run.
a charity run and it's free for anybody to come and get support. So it's a self-referral service, so you don't have to go through GPs. You can go through our website or you can contact our helpline. And we have lovely helpline volunteers that will guide people. If they need signposting, they'll signpost. But ultimately, it's a free service.
Brilliant. He also spoke about the what ifs when his father passed. Is it common to have those kind of worries and regrets of what ifs when somebody dies?
Yeah. We expect life and death to be perfect, and it's not. So we're always going to have regrets and what ifs. We beat ourselves with a coulda, woulda, shoulda stick. But we're all human beings trying to do our best at the end of the day. So it's a very natural thing to think that you could have done something better. But, by doing something different, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a better outcome.
Yeah.
So the best thing you can do if you've got those what ifs is to process them, because that's really important, and try and forgive yourself if you think there's something you haven't done.
I'll get to you now, Jeannie. Dr. Amir was saying about his favourite food and music at his funeral. Are you finding more people are planning that kind of thing for after they pass, to make their day kind of memorable for their family and friends?
Yeah, I would say so. When I started in the funeral, it was like 1994, so there was nothing really personalised. Probably you choose your own hymns and that would be it. Whereas as time's gone on, people choose their own music. Some people do choose their own food for afterwards. There's visual tributes, which there wasn't before, splash of colour, special routes. So there's nothing that you can't personalise now.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's a great way to be, I think. How do you think the CoOp funeral care can help people start to have the conversation?
I think you just need to be natural when you have the conversation. So if you want to speak to like a funeral director, it doesn't have to be formal. So they can come into the funeral home, we can go to their own home. Some people want to meet in a cafe where it's more natural surroundings. And it's not just an hour's an appointment. Some people come back many times, just want to get different ideas. But probably the best thing to do is just think about what fits your personality. If you're quite traditional, if you want a special route, a special design of a coffin, you don't have to make all the choices straight away.
So do you get people coming in who know that they're going to die, like they know they're terminal? Do you get those people coming in and planning their own?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, they will do that. But then you get other people who...
Family members. Maybe.
Family members or people who just aren't poorly or anything like that, but just want to get the wishes down.
So you
it's
can
wrote
do that.
down
You
and
can
forget
just come
about
in
it.
any time.
So it's not set in stone.
And in some ways, again, what I've learnt from this is it's not such a hard conversation once you start the conversation.
It's getting it started. Once you start, you'll find that you will get ideas, but it's just starting it first,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, and so much easier for them, for the family,
Yes.
because you can go, well, actually, they left what they want, and takes all that pressure off, doesn't it? Which must be a massive thing for people that are grieving. If they have no idea of what the person wanted, that must become such a part of the grief system, and the what ifs and the guilt. And
Definitely. It's huge. When you're grieving, you've been through such a shock, so your body has to recover from that shock. So on top of that, if you've been nursing someone, you're exhausted. You're probably not sleeping when somebody's died, so you're exhausted. So having to then think about what somebody wants takes a lot of energy. And no, people don't always get it right, but people try and do the best that they can. So if there is something in place, it is a lot easier.
what are some of the best examples for personalising that you've seen?
We had a funeral of a lady who all of her life was like a dance teacher and was into Zumba. So as her service finished, instead of everybody walking out of the crematorium, they had to do like a Zumba move out. I looked after a lady where, although her funeral was to be traditional, she was avid bingo player. So at the end of the service, when everybody thought they were standing up to say the Lord's Prayer and the final goodbyes, they actually had to give a bingo because all the numbers were on the back of the order of service.
Wow.
So, like quirky little things like that.
So do you help people who have made those wishes, but then there are some certainly religious places that maybe will go, no, we don't allow that.
Yeah, so it's kind of keeping up to date with the rules. So
Right.
if they will let you, say, have a webcast of the service at a church, but they won't allow you to do a visual tribute, it's known who will allow you what.
And do you have people, getting in touch who are struggling with the arrangements that someone's left because they don't agree with them?
Yeah, there's a lot of people that don't agree with family members, but that's just part of life as well. It's part of life and part of death, because we don't always agree. But at the end of the day, a funeral is about that person. It's, yes, we are grieving and we are paying tribute to that person, but it is about that person.
So you can help them come to terms with someone else's decision, really.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just understanding where they're coming from.
So basically, it's about knowing that all of this is out there for people, because I don't think people think it is, or if they don't know where to turn to, and that nothing really is off the chart.
It's such a difficult conversation to have, and if you think about it, even if I think about it myself, it's like I want to avoid it because it's just bring up such
No one
difficult
likes
emotions,
thinking about it.
But actually, when you start talking about it, like we are today, it's not as bad as we think. And it can be quite enjoyable and freeing to have that conversation.
I think the what I found out with Dr. Mill when he was saying it is, you make all these arrangements because since I've been doing this, I've been thinking about mine and I've told my kids, but then there is that thing of I'm going to miss that. It's going to be really good. I'm going to miss it.
I want to be there.
Have a dress rehearsal.
Yeah. Can you make sure there's 1,000 people at mine, please? Because I'm really jealous about that one. I will come back and
An
haunt
ad
you.
in the
if you don't.
newspaper.
Yeah, I'm going to leave that in my wishes with you.
I'll make a note.
Rent a crowd. Well, ladies, it's so informative and so great to have you both here, and lovely to meet you for the first time.
Me too.
Hope we
Thank
see
you.
each other again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This podcast is a Reach Studio production brought to you by CoOp Funeral Care as part of its new Let's Start Talking campaign. Don't forget to subscribe to Let's Start Talking on Apple, Google or Spotify, and you'll never miss an